Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Atypical Philosopher video. Today, I'm going to be talking to someone I've talked to a number of times before, a good man, Ricky Johnson, who started up a YouTube channel just recently, considering and concerning his experiences in the church that he was a member of and has subsequently come out of. We've talked about this previously in terms of his experiences when I've interviewed him before, but actually we're going to talk about something particular today that is a bit of a scandal that has erupted in the church with which he was associated previously, as mentioned. But before we get there, just welcome, Ricky. Welcome back to the channel, mate. I hope you are okay.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Jonathan. Appreciate it. It's good to be on with you.
Yeah, no problem at all. And do you want to just talk to the audience, give a bit of an introduction to yourself and your experience with the church and what the church is, what kind of denomination, give us a little flavor of the church as a segue into what we're going to be talking about as a particular news piece.
Okay, well, the particular church I was in is called the Old Apostolic Lutheran Church. It's one of the sects that came out of Laestadianism. The prophet Laestadius, just by mid 1800s, is when he had his revelations and had his awakening. And I think there's actually a lot of cults that came out of the 1800s. You got Millerites and the Mormons and stuff like that. So usually what it is just you'll have this charismatic guy who's maybe a little I say weird or different, and they create a new religion. That's why there's over 45,000 different denominations of Christianity. But anyway, so these awakenings, which this is in the northern part of Sweden, is where he was located. And so then over time, slowly moved to other locations, Norway, Finland, and then especially a lot of Finnish ancestors came over to the U.S. Early 1900s and brought the religion with them. And so then I was raised in it starting in the 70s when I was born, and I'd say even from an early age, 5 or 6 years old, I always felt like I was 1 foot in, 1 foot out. But I stayed in the church until I was like 45 years old. I was battling my what I saw to be issues or logical fallacies with the religion, but then also knowing or not knowing at the time, but the conditioning, a lot of the damage from conditioning from these type of religions happens at a young age. So, in your psyche, you're carrying around the weight of what you've been conditioned to, what they try to condition you to believe. And then I'm seeing, things that I don't think line up with what the religion is. So then, after years of battling that cognitive dissonance, I finally thought I got to examine exactly why I'm feeling this distress of like what they're saying doesn't seem to align with what I know. So once I did that, then I started examining, psychology of religion and cults. And then I came to learn like, oh, this is why I'm thinking these thoughts and why I'm struggling with this. And I was eventually able to educate my way out of that environment. And since then, I've been very active. Last 8 years, I've been active in a lot of the different communities online when it comes to religion and ex-cult members and stuff. And then the last 6 years, I've been really active in a community of ex-Laestadians, ex-OLC, LLC, all the other sects of it. We have groups where we chat about similarities and differences and things like that. So, but I thought I could bring a unique perspective to things based on the layman's understanding of the psychology of cults. So.
Yeah, interesting. And what we're going to be talking about today, this particular church abuse scandal that has erupted. I wonder whether there will be a move of people kind of rejecting the church. Maybe this harms, and I mean, quite often you see people leaving churches when they have, or religious movements or belief systems when they have jolts to their system. I know people that have left due to divorce, due to loss, and all sorts of different reasons. But also that can be something that solidifies your belief system as well, because you look to God during a time of emotional turmoil. So, but I wonder anyway. Let's have a little look and see what we're talking about, what the main stimulus of our discussion is going to be. Before I do so, actually, and here is the main article that we're going to be drawing from, which was in the Minnesota Star Tribune. So we're up in Minnesota here. Young girls were sexually abused by a Duluth church member. They were told to forgive and forget. Now, I want to just say, trigger warning, we are going to be discussing, and I'm going to be reading some accounts that some people might find distressing if they've experienced some of the things previously. Before we go there's a little bit towards the end of this article, and this is a very, very good article, as you would expect, since it's written in partnership with ProPublica, who's an excellent organization. Anyway, further down this article, there's a bit that I thought we could almost start off by reading, and it concerns kind of understanding how the church sort of operates. I'm just going to find it here. Here it is. So, unlike in other branches of Christianity, OALC. So, what does OALC stand for again?
Old Apostolic Lutheran Church.
So Old Apostolic Lutheran Church preachers, like Bruckelmeyer's guy that we're going to be talking about in a bit, do not attend traditional seminaries or receive formal training before assuming their leadership roles. Instead, according to a church spokesperson, they are selected by the congregation. This is a key part. Their advice is seen as coming directly from God, according to several former church members. Can you kind of explain that a little bit? Give a little bit more flesh on a bone there to what is meant by, you know, this advice coming directly from God.
Yeah, you get so like I said, you know, they don't have the formal training. A lot of people, you can see like they may be almost grooming them to become preachers. If they're, you know, more active in different parts of the church, whether it's Sunday school or reading the Laestadian sermon before the preaching sermon. A lot of these, or all these guys hold like full-time jobs. So they might be plumbers, contractors, some engineers, things like that. Most of them seems like they're in the building trades, or you may have mechanics or whatever. But then, yeah, they do not have the formal training at all, or go to seminary. The way I've heard it explained before is that they're like in the school of the Holy Ghost. So like the Holy Spirit is working within them, and like they, you know, they're channeling God. So people, when they ask for advice or go to see them for advice, they believe that the preachers are given, you know, inspired words from God to provide people with the proper either understanding of things or a decision in life. You may have a big decision in life, and you'll go talk to the preachers and stuff like that to see, you know, get advice. So like, well, since these guys are, like I said, they're not really, I wouldn't say, you know, a lot of them aren't really well read in the traditional sense. I mean, there's definitely intelligent people in the church, but when you're warned constantly about don't look into things, you know, if you learn too much or you look into things, you're going to lose your Christianity. So they've been conditioned, you know, for their whole life too about that. So like they may be very intelligent when it comes to their job and stuff like that. And, you know, many are capable, but most are just unwilling because you've been conditioned to fear information. So that's where I'd say, you know, preachers they're coming at this from a perspective of trying to do what they think is right, but not having enough knowledge to understand like the psychology of what's going on. So.
Yeah, and I think there's a really interesting dynamic there where you have people who aren't trained to do like psychotherapy, to do counselling. They're not formally trained, as you say. As you know, haven't gone to seminary, where you do get some kind of, you know, if you're going to be trained as a preach, say in the Catholic Church, and you're going to be given, I guess, training in how to deal with people, how to deal with congregations, how to deal with in sort of a quasi counseling scenario. But here you've got, you know, as you say, people that are coming from all sorts of different backgrounds, just elected by their community to be this person of great importance, who is the conduit to you know, from them to God, and they just assume this role of speaking for God quite directly to the people who are telling them, obviously, or are, you know, putting them in a position of being a counselor. So I think that's potentially, there are many pitfalls that can be felt there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you don't have an understanding of, especially related to stuff like this with abuse, and you don't understand the psychology of that, and you're not well read on that, I mean, the advice you're giving is very traumatic to the people that are the victims. And you know, I think like any, you know, most humans or whatever, you know, basically good, and I think they're trying to do the best they can, but they just aren't well read enough to understand what they're actually doing. And then when people are getting advice from a preacher, which is coming, you know, they believe coming from God, you know, if you're conditioned in the church and your mind is captured by that psychology of that type of cult, what the preachers say is going to carry much more weight than what anybody else says, authorities, anything. So that's where you can create a lot of damage for the victims.
Yeah. So let's get into the story itself. So as mentioned, it's a Minnesota Star Tribune. Young girls were sexually abused by a Duluth church member. They were told to forgive and forget. I'm going to do a little bit of reading here. So the start of this article, I think, really spoke to me, and like it's pretty powerful. So it starts: the girl pleaded not to go. She fought with her father on the drive over, screaming and crying in his truck until they arrived at the office building for Brookle Brothers, a home construction company on the outskirts of Duluth. She was just entering her first years of grade school. In the office, two men were waiting. One of them was Clint Massey, who the girl had recently told her parents had touched her genitals and groped her under her shirt. The other was Darrell Brooklemeyer, a preacher and leader of the Old Apostolic Lutheran Church down the road, where the girl's family worshipped. Massey was a respected member of the congregation. Brooklemeyer had asked them all to the meeting, according to the girl's account to police years later. So the first point, to make here is that police aren't yet involved. This is something going on between the family and the church. In front of the girl, her father and Brooklemeyer, Massey asked her for forgiveness. Looming over her, the three men wept. So they were the ones weeping. Then the girl's dad and preacher allowed the man who had been sexually abusing her since kindergarten to hug her. Quote, "It was one of the worst things ever," she told police some 15 years later. In accordance with one of the core tenets of the church, the matter was resolved. It was forgiven. It should now be forgotten. If she spoke of that again, she would be guilty of having an unforgiving heart, and the sins would become hers. But she could never forget, and neither could the other children. So what are your initial thoughts with regard to that? We have this situation where she's made, this abused girl has told her parents of the abuse, taken in to meet the preacher and I presume someone very associated with the church, and they all cry in front of her, and then she's forced to hug this guy and forced to give this man forgiveness at the young age she is, without really understanding theologically about this. Well, what are your thoughts?
Well, the first thing is, when they mention the three men wept, that's common in the church when you're having the forgiveness movement. It's people that are having their sorrows over their sin, and they're washing their sin away in the name of Jesus. So it's common to have a movement at the end. It's very experiential. This goes way back to the Laestadius Rottima. Rottima was a second in command guy, that sort of like the Mormons had Joseph Smith, and then Brigham Young was the second dude in the that carried the religion forward. That's the way the OLC or Laestadian movement went anyway too. But bringing this young girl to her abuser is just an abhorrent practice. It's further traumatizing the victim. And when you're conditioned to believe, well, God is working through this preacher, and you think, when you think about that, it's like, from my perspective, it's like, why would God want to further traumatize this victim, let the abuser off, and he can go on to abuse again? Which, these type of environments, this is common for, I've examined so many different religions, so many different cults. I listened to stories of hundreds of abuse people that were abused, abuse survivors and stuff. And it's so common that it's always like they each have their own brand of God that is exclusively working through their religion. But why is it that through all these religions, God seems to want to protect the church and keep things as quiet as possible and further traumatize victims? That doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah, so you've almost got two things going on here. You've got the understanding of this from a kind of legal, secular, practical point of view, like, what should happen, why this is bad, how the police get involved, what's the jurisprudence for this. And then you've got this other kind of world over here, which is, how do I understand this if I'm a believer, particularly in this church? How do I understand this as a member of this church community, to know that this abuse is taking place, and that therefore kind of God has in some way sanctioned it? Like, God hasn't stopped it, right? So God allows this abuse to take place, and then puts this girl in a position as a sanction by the church, which is supposed to be, you know, this is the church, right? The exclusion of other churches, whereby this girl is put through this horrific situation.
Yeah, and then you know, if your brand of God for your religion is traumatizing child like that, and not only, you know, once or twice here, but I mean, there's hundreds of examples of this. I've had so many people share stories with me. But if that
and God, sorry to interrupt, but people sharing stories with you from this particular church or this particular denomination, or you're talking more in general?
Well, through all the Laestadian branches, I would say, like in our communities and groups. I've had many from the Old Apostolic Lutheran Church share stories with me over the years, and we can go over that a little bit in after I you know, finish. I was going to say that about my experiences with when I came to learn about this abuse, you know. But anyway, as for the you know, God further traumatizing the victim. And them saying, well, you know, God's working through our church. God's exclusive through our church. We were told all growing up, you know, we got a silver spoon in our mouth. We're so lucky to be, you know, growing up in this church because we're saved, and, you know, and LBLs and stuff like that. Well, if your God is allowing these children to be abused and traumatized over and over and over again, and you're letting the abuser spend time around more children over and over and over, years and decades, then your God that'd be an evil God. And I would hope a force for good would come and stop that God. Like, that's, I mean, it's and to try and make sense of that, like I said, you're conditioned to believe that, well, this, you know, especially from the elders in Sweden, because like the Bruckemeyer mentioned in a different interview a few months back, I think it was with one of the Duluth newspapers. I mean, he basically, when the police were talking to him, said, well, he follows the advice of the elders in Sweden, because that's where supposedly Christianity's brightest light is, where our elders are in Sweden. So you're telling me the advice that he's getting is from the elders. He's giving advice to this victim, and for some reason, you know, like I said, God is wants to just traumatize children. I don't think so. So perhaps your connection with God isn't real. Whether God exists or not, you might not be in the proper religion.
And then, of course, it becomes a kind of problem of evil argument as well, doesn't it? Which is, yeah, how does God, who is omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent, you know, all knowing, all powerful, and all loving, allow this to happen? Why does it take place? So, you know, what is the rationale behind this?
Yeah, and I got another little story real quick I'll share with you about that. Years ago, there was somebody that was from the church that was saying, like, you know, people, like women within our church, don't have to worry when they're out and about in public. They're not going to get assaulted and stuff like that because we got the protection of God, you know. And I always thought that was silly at the time, but when more and more of this abuse has come to light in the OALC, it's like, okay, that narrative pretty much crumbled, because, you know, this guy is abusing children while they're in church, sitting on his lap in a pew.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, we'll come on to those pretty horrible details. To continue the article, over the course of about 20 years in 2 states, Massey, so this guy Clint Massey, and actually we're going to talk about as well, we can just reference that the brother of this guy has also been found guilty, accused of touching girls in a church. As well. In fact, the way that he was found out, Chuck Massey, not Clint Massey, we're going to be talking about, that Chuck Massey came forward in May after confessing to his counselor, and after his counselor notified him that these confessions require a mandatory report to law enforcement. So, yeah, okay, well, you're protected to some degree by what you tell me, but as soon as you cross a line into breaking the law, then I've got to tell law enforcement, according to earlier statements by the Moorcroft Police Department. So, like, something's running in the family here, it seems. But anyway, back to this original article. Massey had, according to court documents and by his own admission, sexually abused children within the Old Apostolic Lutheran Church, or OALC, community. He touched girls under blankets when their parents were present, in the backseat of a car, with other passengers, even in the pews at church. His abuse was such an open secret among the tight-knit congregation that mothers warned their daughters to stay away from him. This is fascinating. So you get this kind of acceptance that this is happening, is you've got to stay away from that guy. We know what he's doing, but we're not going to report him. So it's this idea that the church is more important than the crime and the victims. And anyway, to continue, some former victims as adults confronted preachers, including Bruckelmeyer, who about what Massey had done to them. Church leaders told Massey to stay away from the congregation's children, and they sent him to a therapist who specialized in sex offender treatment. But they never reported Massey's crimes to police as required by the law. Instead, Bruckelmeyer and other leaders in the church encouraged the victims to take part in forgiveness sessions, which allowed Massey, now 50, to continue abusing children, according to the investigation by the Minnesota Star Tribune and ProPublica. So just before you come back in on that, I just want to give my own personal experience of, I have worked in education in the Portsmouth Catholic Diocese previously, and it became known that the Portsmouth Diocese moved a sex abusing priest who had gone into schools and so on and so forth. They moved him to America for therapy rather than reporting to the police. So there's, in very many different church scenarios and denominational scenarios, there is this desire to protect the church. You look at what happened with Cardinal Ratzinger, one of the previous popes, where he was, complicit in child sex abuse by covering it up, rather than getting these people reported to the police and solving these crimes. If you see, so what are your thoughts on the idea that the church community is more important than the victim or the crime?
Yeah, there's well, I think there's two things there. I mean, one is, like I said, it's always striking that the God for each one of those churches, for some reason, the main priority is always to keep a spotlight off the church that comes from that angle. And then it's like you have like OLC's and the way they handle things, like the Clint Massey, he would have been allowed to keep coming back to church because that's his chance for salvation. So they wouldn't want to remove him from the church, because I think they would feel like that'd be on their conscience, because they're removing him from the church, and then he wouldn't have that church community and his chance for salvation. So I think it's the two different aspects you got there.
So you've got this idea that they wouldn't want him to be removed from the chance of salvation, that to be on their conscience, but they're happy to have not reporting him for sexual abuse to the police on their conscience. It's just a weird set of priorities, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
So to go back to the article again, law enforcement there, and I'm skipping a bit, law enforcement there first became aware of the allegations against Massey in 2017 and said that the church's lack of cooperation, including pressuring potential witnesses and victims to stay quiet about the abuse and preachers failing to report it to the authorities, was a major factor in the delay in bringing charges. Bruckelmeyer declined to comment or to answer a detailed list of questions, but a 2023 interview with a St. Louis County detective, he acknowledged knowing about Massey's sexual abuse and didn't dispute that he took part in forgiveness sessions involving Massey and his victims. So basically, this is an admission that there was a sort of cover-up, if you like, of the crimes. He said it was up to the victims to report the crimes to police. So this is fascinating. It was up to the victims to report the crimes to police, a clear misreading of the law for mandated reporters, doctors, teachers, and others who are required to report crimes against children. Quote, "We don't protect either one," Bruckelmeyer said, of sexual abusers and their victims. So I find this fascinating, Ricky, that the analogy would be, you're seeing someone being sexually abused across the street there, and you go, well, it's up to that girl to report that. It's not up to me to report that crime. I mean, is this the same for every crime, that you just no one else is allowed to report a crime? It's up to the victims to report the crime, and we just have to walk on by the old kind of, oh no, can't see anything over there, don't want to see anything. I find it morally repugnant.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, who's being the ally and advocate for those young children? I mean, somebody's got to stand up and do something. And I mean, as it says later on in the article too, people question and brought up, like, he's still in church, he's got little kids sitting on him, he's touching, kissing, hugging, and the preacher says, like, yeah, we told him not to do that. I mean, if that was me and I knew that, I would want to go over there and just take the child away from him and say, keep your hands off him. But no, you're just
a polite conversation.
Turn on blinders. Yeah, just turning on
Absolutely.
blinders, and then, like I said, that's the perfect those types of environments, the perfect environments for abusers. You can just keep going over and over and over, do the forgiveness session, and then there's a sickness there that needs to be dealt with and treated. And I mean that a person like that needs to be removed from that environment.
Well, that's an interesting whole other conversation about forgiveness in general, which is this idea, and I think you see this a lot when I've seen like priest abusers and whatnot. It doesn't have to be priests; this can be no, it does actually. No, it's about religious abusers. So you get this idea that I've done wrong. All I need to do is seek forgiveness from God. So then you do this horrific crime, you seek forgiveness, you assume God's forgiven you, and then you just wipe the slate clean. It's like, right, oh, now I've done it again. Oh, but silly me, bad me. Oh, sorry, God, please forgive me. Oh, I'm forgiven by God. Oh, that's all right. And I'll do it again. And it's just it allows this perpetuation of whatever crime it is, but usually these horrific sexual crimes to just go on and on.
Yeah, I mean, just doing a forgiveness session like that is not going to stop his compulsion.
No, absolutely. So just to continue the article, Bruckelmeyer told police his actions followed church protocol. Yeah, of course. An internal church document obtained by the Star Tribune and ProPublica suggests that when appropriate, church leaders and others facilitate, quote, a conversation with both parties together, an action that experts who work with abuse victims say can add to a victim's trauma. While the document praises the police and the justice system, it doesn't mention mandatory reporting laws and gives preachers wide latitude on whether to involve police. So the internal OALC church document says that you need to put these two together, the abuser and the abused, and that can promote more trauma. But rather that than going to the police and mandatorily reporting it. It's absolutely
And the document, you just scrolled by it or whatever, that document shows the line where it says where appropriate, get the two parties together, and it's like, I don't know who put together that document. I'm assuming they didn't run that by anybody that is well trained in psychology or anything like that. But I mean, when I read that, I was just shocked. Like, it's like, I cannot believe somebody wouldn't think that this is highly inappropriate. And that's where I get back to, like I said, not being well read, because you're only consuming the information that is church approved. Not that they can't force you to stop reading things that you shouldn't be reading, but psychologically, with the repetition week after week after week of warning people about don't look into things because you may lose your Christianity, a lot of people don't know these things.
Yeah. And I just look at this, the preventative work against violence, harassment, and sexual abuse. So the first preventative bit of work you can do is a proclamation of the word of God according to the doctrine of the Bible. It's like, really? Okay. Like, come on, we need a little bit more than that. We need to see that you're putting things in place to really prevent this kind of abuse, rather than just proclaim the word of God. And that's your first thing you need to do. But yeah. So as the article continues later, there are 33 OALC churches in the US and Canada. Only men hold leadership positions. Now, this could be another problem, because if you're not going to have women who one would assume are more likely to be a port of call, if you're an abused girl particularly, and you're much more likely, I assume, to want to go to a woman to talk about your problems within the context of the church. And if there are no women in leadership positions, then that can actually kind of facilitate this kind of situation. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, actually, there have been some women that have gone against the advice of the preachers and pursued things more. I think it's like you said. I don't think the men would have the same type of understanding or empathy of what a young girl is going through, a young child is going through. So kudos to the ones that did listen to their heart rather than what the preachers have said to them. And along these lines too, I'd like to quickly give a shout out to the advocates that have been working to get justice and to provide some type of assistance and community for these victims. There's been a few different people for their ex-OALC members that have been strong advocates, and they've all been strong women that they've really inspired me. And it's like you get these patriarchal systems, like you said, in the OLC, it's all men running things. But I must say that, these ex-OLC women have been really an inspiration to me. Strong women that they're fighting for justice for these women. So I just want to give them a shout out.
Yeah, absolutely. To continue, the less formal nature of OALC structure, spokesperson said there's no headquarters in the US, means that, unlike sexual abuse scandals in the Catholic Church or Southern Baptist Convention, there's no central authority to hold accountable. Still, news of the criminal case against Massey spread widely in the insular OALC, inspiring more victims to come forward in Minnesota and other states. So there might be other structural problems with the way that there's no centralized kind of hierarchy, and that giving accountability. By forgiving men like Massey, it says later, prosecutors and police said preachers created a situation where the alleged victims had to worship next to their alleged abusers and allowed Massey to escape arrest and prosecution for years. Quote, he was so brazen about it and there was so little done about it that he thought it was permission. Ryan said, wow. And just another section here we'll go through. For the girl who said she was pressured to forgive Massey at Brucklemeyer's office, the silence that followed only compounded her trauma. She reported struggling with debilitating anxiety and obsessive compulsive disorder in her teens. She grew tense every time she walked into the church, especially when she saw Massey holding another little girl. Quote, I lived in darkness for so many years of my life because I couldn't talk about it, the girl said in a recorded interview with police. Multiple times in my life, I wanted to die. When she was 16 and in counseling, she told her therapist how Massey had abused her. The therapist reported it to the police, which is how the St. Louis County Sheriff's Office in Duluth first learned about Massey in summer 2017. Obviously, though, there's like 8 years since then, right? Sergeant Jessica Labor, who was the investigator assigned to the case, in a recorded interview, the girl reluctantly told Labor how she used to sit with Massey and his wife, Sarah, at church just a few rows from the front. Massey would snake his hands up her skirt and touch her thighs and genitals. Another time, at a gathering at the home of her parents' friends, she said Massey told her to get a blanket and began touching her underneath it with her mum and dad nearby. I mean, it's just the rank brazenness of this, where you have this happening in church, where there are so many adults, and you're wondering if anyone actually saw anything like this happening and just turned a blind eye.
Yeah, it's just awful, and like I mentioned before too, the way it's handled and the way the victims are treated. I mean, I've had people tell me that they were abused and they were struggling for years, and it was abuse that was brought to light too, and they're struggling for years, and they've had a parent tell them, "Why don't you just get over it already? Why are you still struggling with this?" Or others.
So someone who hasn't felt that abuse, probably. Yeah,
exactly. It's just lack of empathy. It's horrifying. And then others too have talked to preachers, told them what happened, stuff like that. They've been encouraged to do the forgive and forget. They'd had, their abuser have a session with them, do the forgiveness ritual, and then the preacher would say well, this is about forgiven and forgotten now, so they'd encourage them, not to go to the authorities over this. And some have reported me too that they were actually told, the advice from us, is not to seek, help from the authorities on this now that's forgiven and forgotten. So if you go against that, that's disobedience. And then if you're disobedient to, the word of God, words coming from God, well, that's hell could be on the line for you and stuff like that. I mean, that's just horrific. You're threatening somebody with you're gonna go to hell if you disobey us. So you better not go to the authorities. It's awful, just pure awful.
Yeah, I've often said, and you've heard me say this, no doubt, Ricky, many times. But heaven and hell are the two biggest blackmail entities of blackmail that you can literally imagine in human conception. So there's nothing greater in human conception than heaven. Otherwise, that would be heaven. And there's nothing worse in human conception than hell. Otherwise, that would be hell. And so therefore, if you hold these two things over people, you've got the two of the strongest sticks to kind of manipulate people with, to bribe them with. There is nothing more conceptually powerful than heaven and hell to hold over people to try and dictate their behavior. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, even for myself too, it's like, since I've been outspoken about my experiences, and I mean, I've always shared my experiences for one reason only, is because people that leave these environments lose community and they feel alone. And so I started sharing my story because I know that if I share my experiences, people will feel less alone. And especially learning about like how many people unalive themselves because they lose everything. They lose their community, they lose friends, and they're left alone. So that's the only reason I started sharing my story. And over the years, I've had so many people reach out to me and say, I feel less alone because you've been willing to share your story. And in fact, like I said, a lot of people found me through the interview we did several years back.
Yeah.
And
That's great.
And so, yeah, it's wonderful. And actually, one thing that really surprised me, which I did not expect, is how many people have reached out to me over the years that are in the church but want to leave, but feel
Really?
stuck for a variety of
Yeah.
reasons. And so when this abuse stuff has been coming more and more to light, I've been aware of this for probably the last 2 years, like how bad it really is. And that's why I feel compelled. Like I gotta talk about this, be an advocate for these people, try to help them, if any way to. Especially, like I said, I'm so concerned about people unaliving themselves. I just had somebody share with me the other day that a friend of theirs from the church had taken his life because he felt less alone and stuff like that. So, and Jana Lalich from the Lalich Center of Cults and Coercion said that she's written books about this and she's interviewed so many people, ex-cult members. And she said the thing that helped people the most was listening to content or reading content from people that were actually ex-members of the cult they were in. And she said many people didn't end up unaliving themselves because they felt like they, had somebody they could, even if it was a distance over the internet, they felt less alone. And so I thought, I got to do this because I got big shoulders, and yeah, I'll be threatened. People will say like, well, he's going to have a lot to answer for on Judgment Day because he's, sharing his experiences about the church, and God won't let the church, be talked about this way. I'm not afraid of anything like that, because if there's a God that would send me to eternal conscious torment for sharing my experiences and helping people less alone, then again, a hope of force for good comes and stops that God.
Yeah, and for like trying to give a safe place for people to share worries about abuse and things in these kind of contexts. Yeah,
exactly. It's not about me; it's about other people. That's all it is.
Yeah, and I know you're pressed for time. There's just a few other points, and I think that's what you said was a good segue into this little excerpt from the article, which I found interesting. In an email to reporters, she wrote, so the girl that was abused now is an adult. She wrote that she's still a member of the church and feels supported by its community. I truly believe I'm in the right place. And this is one of these incredible. Of course, I definitely don't want to be judging someone too much who's gone through things that I've never gone through and can barely imagine. But I can't help but look at this from a theological point of view, as you can imagine, Ricky, where I'm always thinking about the cognitive dissonance and stuff that goes on. It's like to still be embroiled in a church, in a community that was responsible for your abuse or responsible for facilitating and not bringing to account facilitating that abuse and not bringing that abuser to account, like, blows my mind. And of course, you surely should be sitting there and going, well, God allowed this to happen, and yet I'm still praising the God that allowed this to happen. And it just that kind of situation just makes my mind boggle.
Yes, I got the same thoughts on that. Like I said, you can't speak for them. I don't want to say what they're feeling or thinking or whatever, but I would tend to believe that it probably is that where they're trying to assure themselves that they are, but like I said, you got that cognitive dissonance where you're trying to fight that off because, like I said, I had to deal with that for years or most of my life. You're trying to fight off things that seem suspect, but you've been conditioned to believe that this is coming from God. But the thing is, over the years,
there must be a
so
reason.
many things,
God moves in mysterious ways.
Yeah, exactly. But when things keep, like the Mormons, ex-Mormons, I hear it a lot talking about their shelf breaking, where there's so many things, like especially if you do their logical fallacies. If you hear preachers say something to be incorrect, and they're speaking it from behind the table when they're preaching, and you're thinking, well, why would God say that? Is he trying to trick people here, or what? Eventually I had so many of those things that built up on my shelf that it broke, and I'm like, I can't sit there and believe that this guy who's whatever HVAC guy or a mechanic or something like that, and isn't trained and isn't well read, or if they quote something to say, well, we all know this, and I'm thinking, well, I just read a study on that, and that's what he said isn't true. Like, how am I supposed to believe? Why is God trying to trick me or whatever? And then along the lines of too, about talking about following God and God advice, there's part of this article too where this officer's talking to one of the victims' moms, and he says, "So you're following what the church says to do?" And she says, "I am following what God says to do." And that tells you right there.
That goes back to this idea that these people are God in almost human form. This is a conduit to God, and actually, these are God's representatives chosen, and so therefore, if I'm talking to them, I'm effectively talking to God, and if I have to do what they say I should do because they are God by proxy.
Yeah. So if you're talking to an authority or you're talking to an expert, psychologist or things like that, what they say isn't going to carry much weight compared to what God's telling you to do. Even if the advice God is giving might seem pretty horrible, you've been conditioned to believe that's God speaking.
Yeah.
Or you to question
and as
God.
mentioned, God moves in mysterious ways. Who am I to question God? Like, just little me. Yeah. Well, just a couple more parts from the article, and then I'll let you go because I know you got to go. But
that's okay. Like I said, I'll just hold on one second. Earlier, like I said, I'll share you a brief story with you about how I first came to know about this abuse in the church. So, but carry on. Sorry.
Yeah, please do. So just I'll read a few more excerpts. Her mum had reported Massey to a preacher when she was a child, she told Clefman. I don't know if this is someone else. At the time, the preacher promised to handle it, she said, and told her mother never to speak of it again. Classic, not even to her husband. Later, she went through a session with Brickelmeyer, similar to the other girl, where she was pressured to forgive Massey and forget the abuse. As an adult, she was alarmed to see Massey in church, hugging and kissing children about the same age as she was when the abuse began, which is why she felt a duty to report it all these years later. So this is other people coming out. I went back to the same preacher, which is Daryl Brickelmeyer, and said, why is he still able to hold kids and whatever? She recalled to Clefman in a recorded interview. And he's like, I don't know, like we've told him that he's not supposed to, but he still does. As if we told the abuser, you're not supposed to do that. And that just stops the abuse, does it? Incredible.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we talked about that earlier. That's the example I gave. Is like, you're seeing this. How are you not going to rip that child off his lap? I mean, I'd be angry. I might want to slap him upside the head.
Yeah. And just another little bit here. Nothing was done by you, Clefman said. So in that meantime, she is not being protected while Clint is still scot-free, doing what he's been doing for 15 years. So this is Brickelmeyer, the pastor, in when he was being interviewed by someone called Clefman here, so one of the law enforcement. Brickelmeyer and Reisenden claimed ignorance of the legal distinction. This is so they've been talking here about how I didn't realize I was supposed to report this, or if we're told this by the person themselves, then we keep it between ourselves. But if we're told by other people, then these kind of different mechanisms of what justifies whether you let this out and tell authorities or not. And it's all like a load of BS. But anyway, so Clefman has said nothing's been done for 15 years. And Brockelmeyer says, I see. He said quietly, and then Clefman said, "You're just keeping a paedophile in your church." And the reality here is that that's what happens. If you don't, bring law enforcement into this, then invariably it just allows these abusers to stay in the church and continue to do what they're doing, as has been the case here for 15 years. So anyway, a fascinating article, well worth reading all of it. It really is a good article, but we don't have enough time to go into the full depth of it. Any sort of closing thoughts on the article or this case before your own anecdotes?
Well, this is according to the reporters, this is like part one of this. So I'm not sure how many articles they're going to be writing about this, or what the topics of the other articles may be. I'm so grateful for those reporters to be sharing this and putting a spotlight on this. So it's something that needs, like I said, sunlight is the best disinfectant. Stuff like this needs to be brought to light if it can affect some change in the church. Hopefully it will. Like I said again, too, you get these churches that all claim they have this access to God. So it's like, okay, if you have this access to God, no, you're going to have a new revelation, and things are going to have to be done a different way. Which, it's like even Mormon church, all of a sudden they got new garments, now undergarments where they're sleeveless. Well, all of a sudden you get a new revelation. Oh, things are changing. So I hope they use this as some kind of catalyst to change things in the church. Usually you got to sell it as a new revelation, though, or something, like, why would you do things wrong all these years? Well, now, it's been a century of hiding things in the church while, covering things up like this. From what I gather from the stories that I've heard, I mean, the people that have been shared with me, I mean, a lot of issues with this abuse in the church and cover up for years from all over the different branches. Which I said will lead into a little bit when I was going to tell you about how I came to know about this. When I first left the church, well, it's been over 6 years now, maybe 6.5 years since I've been out of the church. I had the first question a relative asked me when I left was, did you leave because of all the abuse in the church? And I remember when I heard that question, I was like, what?
Wow.
Like, I had no idea. Like, since I lived most of my life 1 foot in, 1 foot out, I wasn't in the gossip hotline, so I didn't know what was going on because didn't like to visit a lot and stuff like that. So I didn't know like this was such a problem. Well, then after I left the church, people started sharing stories with me and stuff like that, and people that were in like the church branch that I was in and stuff too. Like I had no idea all this stuff. And it just kept snowballing. Hearing more and more of these stories, and people are telling me what happened to them, the advice of what the preachers gave, stuff like that. I was just like taken aback. I'm like, this is horrific. Like if I had heard this decades ago, that would have really broke my shelf. It's like anybody that's even slightly well-read would understand this is horrific. And then after I heard all this stuff and people, talking to me about stuff, I was talking to one of the members from the church, who was a relative of mine too, and I had brought up, this abuse in the church is a big problem, and I'm just shocked the way the church handled it. And the way they responded was like, well, do you believe them? And that gave me such a look into the window of the cult mind right there. And it's like, if you think that at least 95+% of abuse cases are proven true. So if I've heard 50 stories, you're talking 47, 48 of them are true and accurate. But no, the first instinct from the cult mind is to say, do you believe them? Like, how dare you say this about the church?
And I guess like it's probably important to note that this is a human reaction, and then I think cults accentuate that, right? So humans, like whatever it is, like if you have a football team or American football team that you really like, and then they get involved in a scandal, your first thing is, well, I really like that football team, so I'd rather that's not true. So do you think that's true? Please, can that not be true? So whatever it is you're involved in becomes an extension of your own identity, and then
the anger is directed at me because I dared bring it up.
Right. Okay. Yeah. But like automatically, a hit on something you like becomes a hit on you, and so
because it's their identity. That their religion is their identity. It's their life and their identity. So anything you bring up that's problematic about it, it's just like, okay, you're an evil worker. You're doing this and stuff like that. Which also related to this being brought to light and stuff like that too. People said before too, like, well, there'll never be books written about this church because God wouldn't allow his church to be criticized, and stuff like that. And years ago, there was a woman that was an ex-member that actually was, I guess, writing a book. I don't know what the details of the book entailed, but she got in a car accident and died. And they've, I see people sharing that story from church looking satisfied in their face, like, see, God never allowed her to write that book about our church, as if God went and killed her to stop this book. And then why are you happy? It sounded like, from everything I've heard about someone, she was a very lovely woman. And for like 15 years or 20 years, there's been information on the church, and it keeps getting more and more out on the internet. And there's been a blog that's been out for like 15 years that probably has like 1 million hits. But it's funny because even me sharing my stories and experiences, it'd be like, well, he won't be allowed to share this. God won't allow this and stuff like that. And like I said before, if I'm trying to share these stories to help people out, why is God going to strike me down? And then when these stories are shared too, it's like, this is an example that they could use to say, well, this is persecution. This is persecution right here. They're writing, there's a spotlight at church, they're writing articles about us. This is persecution. I wouldn't doubt if people start talking about, oh, this is a sign of the end times now because our church is, made bad light. It's rinse and repeat from all the other cults. Like it's they're also similar
grievance narrative, isn't it, where like we can unite together as a church or a movement or as a cult or whatever even more effectively if we're attacked from the outside. And so any attack from the outside is a galvanizing influence on that community.
Persecution complex is real, and it's like it actually, like I said, it's holding up their narrative of we're the right thing and people want to take us down, we're being persecuted. It's like, no, it's not persecution. It's just you're being held accountable for something that's problematic. It's not persecution.
And I guess this is before we kind of talk about your new venture. This is an important distinction from Gary Greger here. Says churches aren't responsible for paedophilia; they are responsible for covering up paedophilia. Worse, in my mind. So
Exactly.
there is an interesting point to be made there, that actually these are people doing evil things, but what the church can do, and not all churches are going to be the same here, but we've seen this in the Catholic Church, and we've seen it in many other denominations as well, which is, as we talked about, it facilitates this kind of abuse, or it covers up this kind of abuse, or it's just poorly able to deal. Well, it's not poorly able, it should be very well able to deal with these sort of situations, but there's an unwillingness to put the things in place to stop this happening, because it's all about sweeping it under the carpet, keeping the identity of the church, front and center, so on and so forth. So yeah, it's a good point, Gary. Look, before we allow you to go, and also before we get you to talk about your new project, please remember, as a goddess says, have you hit the like yet? Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, although I do very little content on this channel at the moment because I'm so heavily involved elsewhere in another channel of mine. But nonetheless, it's really interesting. There's a bit of a crossover here where I do a lot of reporting on the war in Ukraine, right? And actually JD Vance as a president has asked, for people to forgive Russia, and this idea that they've committed all these crimes and war crimes, like literally now I think it's a couple of 100,000 registered war crimes, and there's been this demand at the moment, this peace plan to kind of wipe the slate clean. And there's a real parallel there, which is like, hang on, you just forgive them, and then suddenly we don't need to concern ourselves anymore with like abuse and rape and torture and horrible things that have taken place on a mass scale. Forgiveness suddenly just magically washes it all away. Anyway, that's just a pet peeve of mine, but there's a good connection that was made earlier in the live chat.
Yeah.
Ricky, so you've talked about how you've been experiencing people come to you and want to talk to you about their experiences or your experience of taking yourself out of the church, that you're now moving on to social media to try and actually make use of your position there as someone that people go to.
Yeah, I recently started a YouTube channel, Facebook page, and Instagram page. You can find me at the Cultyard on all those platforms. Like I said earlier, my intent is just to, provide, from a layman's perspective, provide some explanation for like the psychology of cults, and especially show the similarities between different cults. I've had people ask me too, like, like I'm in the church, questioning things, especially this abuse stuff has brought up a lot of questions in people's mind. And so they're trying to understand, like, are there other churches out there that are like this? Or, do there are other people that feel like they're saved but aren't in our church and stuff like that? And, I've explained to them too that the whether it's Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, Amish, all this stuff, the psychology of that cult stuff, it works the same across all of them. And so, like with the religion, the Bible and stuff like that, there's enough vague stuff in there. You can create any type of religion you want, really based on your personality. So I thought I was just going to try in my own little way to, if I can make any little difference to help people understand like why they're thinking the way they are and stuff like that. I'm hoping that, help them feel less alone. So.
Yeah, and you've literally only just started this, and you've not released any videos yet, just a couple of shorts. But for those who are interested, please go and help out his nascent channel, the Cultyard. Follow him on Instagram and and Facebook, where I think he is as well, as you mentioned, and doing good work there to try and help others. I mean, as you said before, it's not about yourself; it's about helping others, which is fantastic.
100.
I mean, cults are generally bad unless they are the band The Cults, and I have an absolute ton of their CDs. And
yeah, I like the Cult as well.
Yeah,
Sanctuary is awesome.
It's a classic. I saw them in concert this year, actually. Anyway, enough of that. Look, Rick, thank you so much for coming on and talking about this. It's a very serious matter, of course, and I hope I've dealt with it, or we've dealt with it with enough care. Obviously, you know, we're talking about things from a theological, kind of more philosophical point of view, but there at the heart of this, there are people who have been abused and have had horrific experiences, and really the only desire should be that this doesn't happen again, that there is, of course, you know, just desserts for those who have committed these crimes involved in the churches, but the churches learn, and that we can help bring this to light so that it doesn't happen again. That's the main thing. So
Absolutely.
Ricky,
Thank you for having me on, Jonathan. I appreciate it.
yeah, any kind of final words?
Well, like I said earlier, people can feel free to reach out to me. As I said, I was unexpected that there were so many people in the church that actually want to leave but feel stuck and don't know what to do. I've made it clear to anybody that has reached out to me too, I have no intention of taking away somebody's faith or talking them out of their faith or anything like that. All I want to do is just help them feel less alone. If they ask me some questions, I reply to them, but then they feel scared because they're talking to a heathen or whatever, or an evil worker, and they ghost me for a while. That's fine too. It's a long process. It takes a couple years to at least to even break out of that psychology of the cult, and then sometimes people can move on within a few years. Other times, there's decades later, people still have trauma come up in PTSD. So, but I'm open and available to listen to anybody anytime.
Awesome. Well, look, I've known you for a while, and I don't think you're at all evil. But then I am a heathen as well, so maybe it's just bad guys sticking together. Maybe we're both really bad guys.
We're two bad boys.
Yeah. Well, look, thanks so much, mate. All the very best with your new project, and stay online, and we'll talk in the green room. But thank you very much for those who have hung out with us in the live chat, and I hope that this allows people who have had experiences in the church to know that there are places you can go, people like, but not only Ricky Johnson, there are others, I'm sure, very many organizations that you can go to if you want to seek assistance for the predicament you're in a church that you feel you don't want to be a part of anymore. Anyway, thank you to everyone involved. Thank you to Ricky, and take care, everybody, and I'll speak to you soon. Oops, I've got